I'm Chance Dorland, and this is In-Depth, an interview program from expressnews.com where you can find in-depth reporting and other resources concerning every topic you'll hear discussed on the podcast. In March, San Antonio Express News staff writer Alia Malik reported on the worst enrollment decline ever in the San Antonio Independent School District and a budget shortfall that could, at that time, lead to teacher layoffs. That time has now arrived, with Malik reporting this week that more than 100 teachers will be laid off in all. I'm joined now again here on the In-Depth podcast by San Antonio Express News staff writer Alia Malik to discuss this latest update on the ongoing budget issues at SAISD. So, Alia, great to have you back here on the program for the second time. As I briefly mentioned, we spoke back in March about the enrollment decline and budget issues that have been affecting the San Antonio Independent School District this year. So let's start where we left off previously in March. How did we go from that discussion to now looking at what I believe is currently tallied at 132 teachers being let go from the district?
Hi, Chance. Thanks for having me back. It's nice to be here. What happened in between March and now is basically that San Antonio ISD had fewer teachers announce their intention to resign or retire in May than basically they had for the past several years. So in March, when the projected shortfall first came up, SAISD's HR executives and basically everyone in the administration and the board said that they hoped to not have to lay off because of the normal attrition rate of teachers. They knew that they hired about 500 new teachers every school year, and so they thought that with that many teachers leaving, a lot of those teachers just wouldn't be replaced and they wouldn't have to lay anyone off because they would be cutting through attrition. Fewer teachers left in May than they thought. It's not yet June or July when even more teachers announce their intention to retire. But a lot of this has to do with the fact that there are enrollment declines in other school districts, and so there aren't as many places for teachers to go if they were to consider leaving SAISD. So probably that has led a lot more of them to stay put than in years past. Last week, the district started to meet with teachers who were identified for either having their contract not renewed or basically terminated, depending on what kind of contract those teachers had. So by state law, that has to be done based on performance assessments. So performance evaluations were due, I think, at the end of April or right after April 30th. And the district basically took a look at those assessments all over the district, and based on that, they came up with a list of 63 continuing contract teachers who have been in the district for long enough to have not a probationary contract, and 69 probationary contract teachers who can have their contract not renewed if the district determines it to be in the district's best interests. It's worth noting that this isn't just about 500 teachers quitting every year, and will that happen? This is also about what kinds of teachers the district needs to have in every campus and for every subject. So if the district still will probably have a shortage of bilingual teachers or special needs teachers, all of this is part of making sure the right number of teachers are at every campus with the right certifications.
Now, your story on these teacher cuts that appeared this week in the San Antonio Express News and is also available now at expressnews.com. It spoke of some union claims regarding what they called the targeting of certain teachers for these cuts. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, so there was a letter from a former assistant principal, or maybe an associate principal, I forget her exact title, at Lanier High School. And she had already resigned before writing this letter she had resigned for medical reasons. But she basically said that ever since the start of this school year, before anyone was publicly at least talking about layoffs, she claimed that her principal came up with a gotcha list or a hit list of teachers that they wanted to get rid of. The word get rid of was what she claimed the principal said exactly. And So this principal allegedly told the assistant principals and the people who would be doing teacher evaluations, who would be visiting classrooms, to basically do not give the teachers on this list ratings of proficient. I suppose she hoped that if the teachers had low enough ratings, they would be let go. Again, these are all allegations. We don't really have any proof that it's true. The union claims that after that letter was sent around, assistant principals at 2 other high schools came forward and said that the same thing was happening at their schools. The SAISD administration basically has said there's no proof that anything like that was going on, that principals didn't have access to the data that the district was using to ultimately decide who was going to be cut, nor were principals told, anything like your bottom 3 teachers are going to be cut. There weren't numbers given to principals of each school of the number of teachers that they would lose. There were also possibly schools that didn't lose any teachers at all. So it's hard to tell either way. Right now, it seems kind of like a he said, she said, and unless some evidence of this hit list stuff starts to come out, it's kind of an unsubstantiated claim at this point.
So it being that, an unsubstantiated claim, my question is, whether or not this occurred, just the idea that something like this might happen. You talked about teacher ratings. Is that how they would let people go? So is that why something like this might happen, that they would say don't give them good ratings? So even if there are teachers that for one reason or another, the administration does not want to have continuing, if they're going to have to cut people, would it be important to make sure that they don't get good evaluations? Or could they let anyone go that they just decided that they didn't want to have the next school year? How does that relationship work?
Right. So according to state law, if you're going to do a reduction in force, a necessary reduction in force, which is basically, layoffs for financial reasons due to declining enrollment like we have here, according to state law, that has to be done based on teacher performance. And the teacher evaluation system has a bunch of different components, including a classroom visit and looking at, other data, other aspects of the teacher's performance. So all of these cuts, according to state law, had to be made based on those evaluations. And the district decided to do it based on this year's evaluations only, not going back 2 or 3 years, because they said it was because their evaluation system is still so new. They were concerned about inconsistent data if they looked at last year, which was the first year of this new evaluation system that they have.
And so since this accusation is out there, what are your thoughts on where this might go? Is this just something that they're talking about? Do you think that there's some force behind pushing this forward and maybe one day opening up some sort of a legal argument? Where do you see this pursuing into the future?
The teachers union already is suing the district over a partnership with Democracy Prep to take over Stewart Elementary School, with which they're alleging was done illegally. It's possible they could file a different lawsuit or maybe at least a grievance. I know that they're planning on meeting possibly tomorrow or at some point in the future to discuss their, quote, next steps. So, yeah, they had asked the superintendent and the board to open an independent investigation into these claims. I've heard no announcement that was going to happen. So at this point, it's maybe the teachers are waiting to see whether that will happen, or maybe they'll decide to file some kind of a grievance. It's kind of up in the air.
So perhaps something you'll be reporting on for the San Antonio Express News into the future, and maybe a third appearance here on the NDEP podcast, Alia. Let's get back to these numbers. We've been talking about this current tally of 132 teaching positions, but the budget cuts also include more than just teachers. Who else is included in all of this? So as part of the reduction in force, for example, if we're talking about cutting positions, there were also 18 campus-level administrators, which usually means like assistant principals, who are losing their positions, as well as 13 central office administrators, basically people who work
for the central office in some kind of academic capacity.
And then do you know specifically, either in this case or just generally, when a school district is looking at reducing positions, most likely because of budgetary reasons, how do they decide we're going to get rid of so many teachers and then so many other positions? Is the teacher position the priority, so they try to get rid of these other positions first? How do they decide where the positions are going to be taken from in a situation such as this?
Because this is all enrollment-based, it really does depend on enrollment is driving the number of positions you're going to have at any school and in the district overall. So that's part of why teachers are being laid off at all, is basically this idea that there are some campuses that are going to have more teachers than they can afford, because the schools are funded basically on a per student basis by the state. So basically they're trying to look at how many students they think they'll have on every campus next year, and they call it right sizing, they'll use that to determine the number of teachers that they'll need. The same goes with assistant principals and central office administrators, and they're doing that to save money in the district. And I know, at least for central office and probably for campus administrators as well, they're basically making these cuts by consolidating either departments or consolidating the tasks of maybe more than one campus administrator into one campus administrator.
Sure. And that's something that's probably common in a lot of areas now, especially rurally, as a lot of parts of the United States are losing students, but then also budget issues that are happening across the country. I'm wondering now, since, Alia, this is an update from our previous conversation in March where we talked about the largest ever enrollment decline for this school district. We talked about how that would lead to budgetary issues because, as you've already mentioned, you get a certain amount of money based on how many students you have. If you have less students, obviously you're going to have less money in the future. Now that we have this current tally of 132 teaching positions, and then also those other positions that you just mentioned that are going away for the next school year, what does the district look like now moving forward into the future for the 2019 school year and then also beyond? Have they announced more plans? Who's to say if they're not going to have more budget declines for one reason or the other, or perhaps driven by even less students in the future in the district?
The most I've heard them say is that they hope not to make any more cuts next year. We know that these cuts are based on their projections for next year. They had a very large enrollment decline this year, and they're projecting an additional decline next year. And the $31 million shortfall that the district has is based on their budget projections for next year. So in theory, if the decline is not a lot bigger than they think it's going to be, we're at least set for next year. That's the point of these layoffs. Past that, the 1920 school year, for example, we don't really know.
And then, Alia, we do have a few moments left. Any final comments or something that we haven't discussed so far about these teacher positions that are leaving the San Antonio Independent School District, as well as these other administrator positions that we've been discussing on today's episode?
Yeah, so I just looked at some of the notes that I have. And so far this year, as of the point in May that they had this meeting earlier this week, 152 teachers had announced their intention to resign and retire already. So the district saw the need to cut 132 teachers on top of that. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that they want to make sure not just that they can eliminate 500 teaching positions through attrition, but that attrition has to be in the grades and in the subjects that they think they will have too many teachers based on next year's enrollment. So it's all kind of a puzzle, and they have to just make sure they have the right number of teachers at every school for every subject and every grade. It could be that over the summer they do end up with some openings, that more teachers leave and suddenly, a position that they cut might be needed again. They've said that the teachers that they laid off could reapply for those positions. There's always a need for certain types of positions anyway, even now. They were having a job fair or announcing a job fair last week at the same time that they were laying off teachers, which is, and it's for that reason, but it also felt like a slap in the face to a lot of these teachers. And the budget cuts, I also just wanted to add that the budget cuts aren't only being done through a reduction in personnel. There are a few $1 million here and there that are coming from other things, other cost savings they're trying to identify, and from the tax increase that voters approved in 2016.
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought those topics up, because this whole thing kind of reminds me of like the restructuring of a company. You might have some things that, yes, we need to, get rid of certain employees. But, if you have a shortage in second grade teachers, even though you're getting rid of, these 132 positions as of now, you might need to hire a couple more second grade teachers. You might need to restructure certain things that are doing well while cutting back in other areas. So yeah, you're right. It is kind of like a puzzle. It's not a straight line in reductions. And as you also mentioned, it's not just getting rid of teachers and other support staff to save money, much like a budget of the state of Texas or any other state, or even, the United States. You're going to feel these cuts probably in some other areas as well.
That's correct. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, Alia, it's been great to speak with you again about an unfortunate subject, but the information that you give, I think, is very important to understand what's going on. As we just discussed, it's not so easy. It is a complicated system, and hopefully these cuts, as you mentioned, are preparing for the numbers that they are expecting, and there won't be more cuts in the future. But if there are, and even if there aren't, we might have you back on the program again to discuss what's going on at the SAISD district here in the San Antonio area. So thank you for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me.
And thanks to San Antonio Express News staff writer Alia Malik for joining me for today's episode of In Depth, an interview program from expressnews.com. For the San Antonio Express News, I'm Chance Dorland.